The following is a production of Sharkflight Media. Sharkflight Media. Sharkflight Media. Sharkflight Media.
From mechs to mages or agents to Argonauts, this is the world of Chris Kennedy Publishing. This is the CKP Future Books Podcast.
Happy New Year, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Future Books. I hope this year is better for everyone than last year. I know it's going to be a better year for CKP. We have a lot of new books coming out this next year, and I think they're probably going to be better than the ones we published this year. And to tell us about what's coming out in the month of January, we have our hard-working nose to the grindstone publisher, Chris Kennedy. Chris, thank you for coming this month.
Hey, thanks for having me back. Looking forward to talking about what we're going to do here next year.
I tell you what, this being our third year together, when you look back at where things were when we started this and where CKP is now, it is amazing how much the company has grown and the number of really excellent authors that have come to CKP and been added to the fold in the last 3 years.
I couldn't be any happier. I mean, we've done a great job. Everybody, that's part of CKP really helps to make it go, including you. I mean, wouldn't be where we are right now without all the things that you do to help us go too. So, I mean, it's truly a family affair where, everybody contributes, and because everybody contributes, we're able to do a lot more than, companies that are a lot bigger.
The company is one of the happiest places I've ever been involved with. Everybody, as I said off air to you earlier, it's kind of like Lake Wobegon. Everybody's above average. Every person that I have been fortunate enough to work with CKP has been a joy to work with. There's no dead weight. There's no people who are in it for just themselves. Everybody seems to try to make everybody else better, and I'm super happy to be associated for another year with CKP.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great having you. And I think that you're right on with that. There's a couple different chats where the authors come together and they're not, anybody that's doing something right is happy to share it with all of the other authors so that everybody gets better. Everybody sells more books. Everybody, is a better author and craftsman and businessman. And it really does, it permeates the entire company where everybody, helps the next person up. And that makes everybody better, and it makes things, go better, which is awesome.
Well, to start off January of 2023, we're going to start off very strong. One of my new favorite CKP authors, his book, Prince War Leader by Fred Hughes, will be released on January 6th. Fred is our featured author this month, and so if you're listening and you listen to the second half of the podcast, you're going to hear a wonderful interview with a very good author. This book and this series has been extremely exciting for me. If you're a Vorkosigan fan, if you're a John Ringo fan, you will definitely love this series and this book.
Oh, absolutely. And it was one of those things where Fred had published the series, the first 3 books, and it had had some success. But he didn't like some of the comments that he got that, it needed a better editor, it needed this, it needed that. And he was a firm believer in it. And, people can listen to the other part of the interview and hear it in his own words. But he brought it to me because he wanted it to be as absolutely good as it possibly could be. And I was honestly a little surprised when he said, "Hey, I'd like you to republish this." And why? But he told me, and we talked about it for a little bit, and, there are things that I can do to help. And so I took it on. And in January, the 3rd book, Prince War Leader, comes out. That's going to kick off the year for us. And that'll be the third of his three that, were previously published. And then we go right into new stuff because I've got the next two on the schedule. There's one in both February and March. And we're going to start getting, what happens next? The things that even though people, may have read it before and kind of stayed back because, okay, I've already read it. Yeah, it may be a little different, but, not enough that, I care. Now they're going to get to the good stuff and everybody can jump right in. And I think that, not only are they going to be, if you liked it before, you're going to love it now, because, he's become a better author with a little bit better editing. I think that the story flows a little better, and it's just all around a much better product. And if you liked it before, you're going to love it now.
Yeah, and I'll say to our listeners, if you're a fan of Prince Roger, you definitely need to just rush out and buy the whole series because it's not the same story, but it's the same flavor. And he does it very well, and he has promised me that at the end of the third book, I don't have to wait 20 years for the fourth one.
Well, there you go. And I can tell you that's true because I've got the fifth one already. So there you go.
So you people, you actually get some closure if you stay with CKP. We actually make deadlines.
Yes, we do.
And then on January 13th, William Frisbee continues his last Marine saga with Genocide of Mankind. And tell us about that.
Oh, that's for folks that have been hanging around, I'm hoping everybody's jumped into this series because this is a really interesting and well written and really just draws you in kind of series. Basically, several Marines end up in a spaceship in cold sleep and they miss their target and they just cold sleep all the way out into the outer reaches to where, they're found hundreds of years later and everything in the world has changed. And actually the U.S. no longer exists. So what do you do when you've sworn an oath to a country that no longer exists? You defend the principles for which it stood. And if those don't exist anymore, then you make them. And that's, what they're doing now. And there are all sorts of bad things going on, and they stand for justice and truth and honor and all those things that Marines are known for. And they're going to make it happen. They're going to save the day because they can.
And then on January 20th, we have an author by the name of Chris Kennedy.
That
guy. And I believe this is a continuation of your kaiju novels, Point Break. Is that correct?
Oh, it absolutely is. It is the third book in that series. The first one was written by Kevin Ikenberry and I. That was The Last Stand, which I believe you really liked up until the very end. And then you're like, I need the next one right now to find out. So that is Kevin then wrote the second one and I wrote the third one, which is Point Break. And it takes on events that are hinted at in Kevin's second book, which is Vortex Stingray. And then you learn some other things that are going on and you find out an awful lot about where we are going to fit in this new galaxy. That's where we go with this one is, humanity's place in the galaxy in this new world, and how are we going to get there and what are we going to do to take our part? Humanity isn't very good at standing on the sidelines and just watching things happen. We want to be in the middle of it and making it happen, and this is where it starts.
And for our listeners, this is a collaboration, a universe that's being shared with Chris and Kevin Ikenberry. And if you don't read anything else, and you haven't done so already, go buy the first one because you get to see air jockey riding tanks, and you get to find a tank jockey riding airplanes, and it's worth.
Well, that was the funnest part of that. Was I was the one writing all of the tank stuff, and Kevin was writing all of the air portion, and that was for those that may not know, I was a naval aviator and he was a tank driver, so the fact that we were doing each other's specialty was kind of fun, and it worked out really well.
So it's worth buying for that.
We had somebody to QA all of our stuff too. You don't get a lot of, that's not happening. Obviously that guy never was in a tank and he doesn't know because Kevin read all the tank stuff and said I was right on. So
it is a great book. The first one, and I'm sure the second and third one are too. I have not had a chance to read Kevin's book, and I haven't seen yours yet. So I'm sure it's going to be great.
Well, you haven't seen it because I just finished it like 3 days ago. So it is going to be hot off the presses. I
will caution the listeners, do not get invested with any character that you'd want to be friends with because they will kill them. And then we're going to finish up January.
And that is a nice segue right into Kevin Ikenberry and Jason Cordova.
Exactly.
Because I don't think Jason Cordova's ever met a character he wasn't afraid to axe.
Exactly. And then you team him with Kevin Ikenberry and you just don't get invested with anybody. Kevin made his own dad cry. That's just mean. He's got a restraining order from his dad after one of the books. So we're going to end the month of January on a Cloudy Day, a new Four Horsemen universe novel by Kevin Ikenberry and Jason Cordova. And I'm hoping that since this is starting January, that the rest of the year follows with a bunch more HU stories. So tell us about On a Cloudy Day.
Well, actually, not only is it going to continue, but Kevin Ikenberry and Jason Cordova have 2 in a row.
Oh boy!
They've got On a Cloudy Day, which is going to be at the end of January, and then they have the next one in the rotation too, which is they're about halfway done with, which is The Misfits. And these 2 stories are going to kind of tie up the Peacemaker thread that was going on, kind of. Along with the main storyline. Now they're going to be in the main storyline as part of the Phoenix Initiative, and they are going to tie everything in, and it will bring the Peacemaker line totally into the main storyline and tie everything up there.
Oh, boy. Well, that's going to be a massive book.
It was so massive it became 2.
This is going to be a great January. There's not a bad book in the list. I hope everybody takes advantage and purchases all 4 of them. And for what's been going on lately, this is a very light month for CKP. We've been averaging 5 and 6 a month. So this is what's now an unusual month. It used to be our standard 4 a month. So.
And I think that this is probably where we're going to go for the next for the next year. I think that this is kind of what you can expect going forward. Probably a couple fewer over the course of the year over what I've done the last couple of years. I know I keep saying I'm going to do fewer the next year, and then it always turns out to be more. At least that's what my wife reminds me of every single year. But this time we really are going to try and reduce just a little, and concentrate on making sure the ones we do are every bit as good as they can be, that we get all of the marketing behind them so that they get out to the greatest number of people possible. I think you've probably already seen it in some of the covers that are coming out that are just awesome. We want to continue that. Want to continue awesome stories and bring people everything that, hopefully they've come to expect from CKP.
Well, that makes a wonderful segue into my next question. We are starting a new year, and I know that you have lots of plans for 2023, and I know some of them can't be divulged yet, but what can you tell us about 2023?
Well, like I just said, that's what we'll be looking at.
Smaller releases, smaller number of releases,
smaller yet bigger. We'll also be continuing to expand the international. The first French book comes out actually on my birthday, which is December 26th. So we'll start hitting France here real soon. Actually, by the time this plays, it'll already be in the past. But so that's good. We're moving there. Bringing the stories to some other people, and I'm really looking forward to bringing some of the stories that we already have to conclusions, because the authors have some other ideas and other things that they want to write, and they've already given me some of those plans, and I'm really looking forward to them as well. So, we, like you said, talking about not having to wait a long time to get the next book, but also, tying up stories, completing things and not leaving them hanging, and getting closure, ending stories, and then moving on to the next great thing. And we've got several next great things lined up for next year already, and I'm looking forward to bringing them to you.
Are we going to still continue to do audiobooks this next year?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I think we've got 4 that are just going through final prep right now. Salvage, Last Marines, Lunar Free State, several others I know are in, about to come out. We had We Dare Semper Paratus actually just launched today, came out, and there are 3 others that are in the queue that have already been completed and are just waiting to come out. So absolutely.
And I asked this, and you can't answer it, but since a number of what ended up being series at CKP found their beginnings in the multiple CKP anthologies that we've done over the last 3 years, are we planning on doing some anthologies in the next calendar year?
Oh, absolutely. And, I realized the other day, hey, we're due for a 4 Horsemen anthology, and there is a fantasy anthology that is coming out for Fantasy, same as it has the last. I think this is the 4th one in a row. So we're doing that. And there will be another couple opportunities for people to participate and submit something for anthologies. I expect there's a Salvage one coming. I need to get a 4 Horsemen one on the books. And then, we'll probably do another 1 or 2 this year for other things as well.
That's great. And is there anything else that you want to bring up?
No, I think that's pretty good. It's been a really good year. This has been the biggest year for CKP as far as sales go, by quite a ways. Even though a lot of people are experiencing down years, other I know a number of different publishing houses that have gone out of business here in the past year. But we're continuing to do well. And I think that's because of not only the product that we put out, but also the great readers that we have and the people that support us across the board, both from the reader side as well as folks like you, Randy, that help out and do all of the things that make us go. So couldn't be happier with where the company is right now. And the kind of books that we're getting out to everybody. And I'm looking forward to doing it even better next year.
Well, I will find it hard to believe that you can do it better, but I am looking forward to seeing what better is. I want to say to the listeners, Happy New Year, and I hope your new year is more successful than last year. I hope that you have lots of discretionary money to buy books with.
I do too.
And I want to thank everyone who's listened this year and will be listening next year. And we appreciate anybody who listens. Please, the best way to make a podcast grow is word of mouth. So if you enjoy this and you know someone who reads science fiction and fantasy who would be interested in knowing what's going on and when stuff's coming out and listening to in-depth interviews with authors, please let them know. And I just want to say thank you. And thanks for making the podcast successful.
Like and share.
And so hopefully I'll be able to talk to you again in February. And anything you want to say in closing?
No, just thanks for everything everybody's done to support us this year. I hope you have an even better year next year.
All right. And we'll talk to you again in February. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And now we come to the second half of the podcast. Our featured author this month is Fred Hughes. He's a new author with CKP, and he has an interesting story. He comes to us in a most unusual way. He had already written and published the first 3 books, I believe. I know for sure 2 that CKP has published in his name. And we are going to talk about that transition from indie publisher to come into CKP in the podcast. But I am so honored to have Mr. Hughes. As much as you've heard me talk about John Sears and the Lunar Free State series, I feel just as strongly about Mr. Hughes's Britannia series. It starts with The Prince Awakens. Welcome, Fred. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
Well, thank you so much, Randy. I appreciate it. And I agree with you. John Sears writes it great. That's a great series, and I love it too.
Well, you are right there with him. I think you're going to be as popular and have as an enthusiastic response for your writing as John has gotten for his. So to start the podcast, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little like mini bio, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, mini bio is, first off, I never envisioned myself as being a writer. If you'd asked me 3 years to describe myself, I would have said that I was an engineer by trade and a historian by passion, because that's what I was. I learned engineering by being in the Navy. I was in the service for 20 years, back from the late 70s to the late 90s. Some would say that was the dark days of U.S. Armed Forces, and it sort of was, but that's a different story. Learned engineering there, got out, went to work as a maintenance professional for various manufacturing companies. Some of them I'm sure you've heard of. I worked for Pepsi for a while. I worked for Coke for a while. I worked for Smith & Wesson, the gun company, for a while. So sort of a sequence of circumstances. I never envisioned retiring. I'm not saying I'm a workaholic, but I don't like sitting around not doing anything. So early 2020, I got ripped out of my company. They were downsizing. My position was eliminated, and all of a sudden I was looking for employment at the same time that COVID hit. So the wife said, well, you've been writing this book in your head for as long as I've known you. Why don't you write? So I did. So it took me a year, but I got the first book out in The Prince Awakens. So by circumstances, I'm suddenly an author.
Well, for our first book, you knocked it out of the park. For our listeners, I would say, and I hope this doesn't offend you, but I would say that if I had to describe Fred as an author, I would say he's a little bit of Louis McMaster Bujold, because Hazard will give you some, and Hazard is the nickname of the main character in the Britannia series, Prince Henry. And I would say he will give you a little bit of a feeling of Miles Vorkosigan, a little bit of Ringo and Iron Mike, and probably a mixture of a little Heinlein and a little bit of H. Beam Piper. And the first book starts off with a bang and grabs you, and you can't put it down. I stayed up to 2 o'clock in the morning when I got my hands on the first book and read it. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about Hazard and the world of Britannia?
Well, Hazard King, or Prince Henry. They're the same person. But you made the comment about John Ringo and Iron Mike, but I always, there's a little bit of Prince Roger in Hazard as well.
Oh, yes. Except he wasn't particularly foppish.
No, Hazard's not foppish, but Prince Roger a little bit was. But anyway, the Britannia Empire. A little bit of backstory. This was a group of colonists who fled our solar system in the late to mid 21st century, when everything was about to go down the toilet in what would be referred to in one of my future books as the First Fusion War. So a group of colony ships, they just discovered hyperspace travel, didn't know how to navigate in hyperspace, a lot of unknowns, but if they stayed, they felt that they would die. So these colony ships jump into hyperspace. They fly more than 1,000 light years away from Earth. It takes them over a year to do it. And they found a new colony, which expands and then expands some more and eventually becomes, 1,000 years in our future, the Empire of Britannia. Well, don't want to get bogged down with anything, but Prince Henry, or Hazard King, as he prefers to be called, he's the second son of the Empress. His father, the consort of the Empress, was a serving fleet officer, and as a second son, he wants to follow in his father's footsteps. Doesn't want to do it as a prince, so he assumes a nom de guerre of Hazard King and enters the fleet and begins a normal fleet career. At least he thinks it's a normal fleet career. And thus the adventure begins. He's serving in the fleet. The Empire is fighting an alien menace that won't communicate with him and just captures and demolishes star systems. And he's in the middle of fighting battles against them. The crux of the matter is he doesn't want to be emperor, doesn't expect to be emperor, but his oldest brother is an idiot and attempts to a coup against their mother, and he's the one person in a position to stop it, and he does. And that's basically his book one, him reluctantly becoming the savior of the empire.
I love the character of Prince Henry and Hazard, according to which hat he happens to be wearing at whatever particular time in the book. But I also like the fact that you surrounded him with believable people, and that he brings everything he does. He brings a group together and makes them better than they were individually. And it's hard enough to write a believable main character, but if I had to offer an opinion on what your strength as a writer is creating good characters, and a good character makes a great book. You can have the best story in the world, but if you have characters that are boring or two-dimensional, the book's not worth reading. So I say that to say, Henry is not the only good character in the book. Everybody that you meet in the book is important and has a story. And I hope you have some ideas or maybe some plans of maybe telling some of those stories in the future.
There are, I am at some point, and it's one of those things as an author, you don't ever seem to have enough time to do everything you want, especially when Chris is saying, when's the next book going to be ready? But when I was writing the book, like you, the people listening, I've read a ton, science fiction. I mean, and I'm old enough to, started with Heinlein, evolved into John Ringo and John Henry or Jack Campbell. And now, a ton of people write in military sci-fi. But One of the authors, I forgot to say David Weber. How can you forget David Weber? But as a reader, one of the things, and this is one of the reasons why I put a lot of effort into some of what I often refer to as Hazard's Merry Band, is a lot of books, like you said, it has a great central character, but it's all me, me, me. Every scene is the central character. He's the most important one. He might have one or two other people that he interacts with, but basically it's sort of like he does everything on his own by himself. And I said, no, I don't want this to be always from Hazard is not going to be in every scene. That was one of the things when I started writing, that Hazard was not going to be in every scene. So there had to be other characters that were developed, and not just bad guys, although I did put some effort into creating, bad guys. But even his other people, he wasn't going to plan every single thing. So let's go see what, one of my favorite characters is the Marine Gunnery Sergeant.
That was my question to follow this one. Please tell me there's going to be a Mike story.
There will be. I don't know if it'll be a story or maybe a standalone book by itself, but there will be a Mike story. It will probably be a prequel where it sort of shows how Mike became Mike. There are references sprinkled through all of the books where he, like in the one I'm writing now, Hazard is planning a mission, and he wanted the commandant of the Imperial Marine Corps involved. And so he asked Mike, can you get a hold of this guy and ask him to come by the house because I want to have a discussion with him? And Mike says, oh, yeah, the Master Sergeant of the Marine Corps is an old buddy, and I'll get a hold of him and make the arrangements. And then Hazard asked, have you ever served with him? He goes, yeah, he was my battalion commander on, whatever ship. And he was a starchy son of a bitch then. And he still is. So there's Mike makes several references like that through, and, he was a Marine commando till he wasn't. And there's a hidden story there which will probably be what the book is about. But yeah, there's Mike Sondheim, and then his sidekick, Master Sergeant Jerry Rodriguez, who starts out as a corporal at the very beginning. One of my favorite characters who, yes, I do kill her off, Chris Jurgensen, who's his communicator.
You're right.
And she gets killed in book 2.
In a great way, by the way, people. That death scene is worth reading the entire book for.
People, I've been asked to read that as part of, and I can't do it because I cry every time I read it. Cry then, I cry at her funeral.
Well, the funeral. Golly, man, you did such a good job. And in some ways, that funeral scene reminds me of a couple of the scenes in Richard Fox and David Weber's Governor. There's a couple of scenes in there that just rip your heart out. And that particular, the death scene and the funeral, that however you came up with the idea of doing the funeral the way you did, that was freaking genius.
And I'm sitting here tearing up thinking about it, to be honest. But and creating these characters is fun. Now, I'm not going to be like Jason Cordova, and he just loves killing characters, and I'm not going to do that.
Well, John Ringo's the king of making you love somebody and killing them.
Yeah, and even in book 1 where I kill off his first bodyguard, and it wasn't even halfway into the book.
Yeah, but, Mr. Hughes made everyone who's reading that first book think, oh, okay, this is going to be like Lethal Weapon. This is going to be a buddy story. And, you've got the bodyguard and you've got the main character. And, this is going to be Lethal Weapon. We're going to have the main character and he's going to have his sidekick and it's going to be funny. And he dies.
Yep, he dies early on, really. He doesn't last very long.
No, just long enough for you to get invested in him.
But he does make a brief appearance at the beginning of book 3. just as a spoiler alert. And so does his communicator.
Oh, Chris.
Chris makes a brief appearance.
Yes.
So, yeah, creating good support characters who can support scenes by themselves was incredibly important. And I agree with you that you can have a great storyline and a crappy character, and the book will never sell anything. And in the same way, but I think if you have a great character, you can, and I think this applies to me, although other people say different. If you create a great character, a mediocre storyline will still carry the book.
I agree with the concept. I don't agree that it applies to you.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think it's a pretty good story. I think I give everybody a little bit of everything, whether you like space battles, they're there. And those of you who, want more, in your face, pow, pow, shoot 'em up action. There's some of that in book 2. There's a lot of that in book 4, by the way. The Marines get very involved in book 4.
Oh boy.
So, everybody, my book keeps getting classified in Marine, space Marine science fiction. I'm going, well, I might as well write some shoot 'em up action scenes for the Marines.
Yeah, you might as well embrace it.
Yeah.
I will also say that very much like David Weber, since we're talking about characters, one of the things I always loved about the Honor Harrington books is the fact that, especially if you spent 20 years reading them like I have, you watch the characters that live. Everybody that she touches, she's like a moon. She brings them into her gravitational sphere, and then they go around the planet, and then they fly off, and then you see them 2 years later in another book, and because of that tangential exposure to Honor, they go on to be successful because they emulate a lot of the things that she did, and they don't want to tarnish her reputation or disappoint her by not doing their very best. And I felt the very same way about Hazard and the people he surrounds himself with.
Yes. And I tried hard to Hazard, for the listeners who haven't read, Hazard has a very dysfunctional family,
to say the least.
Well, first off, his mother's Empress. His father is the Empress's consort, and
the most normal person in the book,
and probably he's like the anchor that everyone in the family, that the Empress revolves around, and that even Hazard revolves around. There's a scene when Hazard, and I want to say it's in book 4, or Hazard returns to the report out on the final battle and peace negotiations and things like that. And he makes a comment to his father. He goes, because his father's so proud of what, is gushing about how proud he is of what he's done. And he goes, well, when things got tough, I just asked myself, what would Dad do? Yeah.
And wasn't there a scene in book 2 where he is in the study of the house that, the townhouse he lives in, where he tells his dad that only thing he ever wanted to do was be a serving officer and do what he did until he got married.
Right.
And so,
and that's sort of a recurring theme that gets mentioned quite a few times. That's even to the point where in book 1, when his mother informs him that she's going to make him the crown prince and the heir, and he goes, I don't want it. I don't want to be emperor. I just want to be a fleet officer. And she pulls, she knows how to play him, like, well, all mothers know how to play their kids. She plays the duty card, you have an honor, you have a duty and obligation to the empire to do this. And he has to say, okay, fine, but I'll do it on my terms.
So the books are great. And book 1 and 2 are out. Is that correct?
Book 1 and 2 have both been re-released. Book 3 will be coming out the first week in January, so that's pretty soon. And like we discussed earlier, book 4, I just sent it to Chris after my final author's review of editing, and Chris will now go through it, and that will be released the first week in February. And that's the first brand new book that Chris will be releasing of mine.
Before we get to the second half of the questions I want to ask, I want to really encourage the people who are listening, buy the first book. That's all I asked you to do. Buy the first book, read the first 25 pages. If it doesn't grab you, this book is not for you. Because if you enjoy the books that I enjoy, 25 pages into that book, you will be looking to find out how you can get the rest of them so that they'll be ready for you when you finish the first one. It is that good. So,
well, thank you.
Now, I want to ask you, because you are unique with CKP. Your books, the first 3, were already written and independently published and have been extremely successful. Over 1,000 reviews on Amazon. We have several authors at CKP who had written even some of the books that we've published independently, but most of them were not as successful as this book has been. What made you decide to partner with CKP? And now that you have, and you're within a structured environment rather than being on an island, what benefits do you see came with joining up with CKP and republishing your books through there?
Well, it's funny. When a brief history of being an independent author, I mentioned that I wrote the first book as almost a form of therapy and spent a year writing it. So now I had a finished product, and it's like, okay, what do I do with it now? I've got a year's worth of effort into this, which, to me seemed like it took forever to write it. And so I decided, did a little bit of investigation. I'm going, okay, it's not that hard to self-publish. Now, if you want to have a halfway decent chance of selling anything, you got to polish it a little bit. So I actually went online and found a freelance editor to go through and, spent, hard money, several $1,000s to have it edited. And the editor did a so-so, and I think part of the reason why I got so many bad editing comments was more a function of me rather than the editor. So managed to get a cover, found someone to create a cover and published it on Amazon, and it just sort of sat there for a while. And so here I'm living in a vacuum because I have no experience, no contacts, nothing in the industry. All I'm doing is reading and watching YouTube videos about how to publish and what to do after you're published and everything else. And it was like, geez, didn't know what I was doing and really didn't contemplate, even though the book was set up to be a multiple book series. Didn't really, and then all of a sudden people are bugging me on Facebook, when you're going to write the next one? And I'm going, well, leave me alone. And so enough people, and I'm going, well, I sort of owe it to these people because I didn't, I sort of left it hanging out there. So I started writing book 2, and book 2 took me about 9 months. And the last week in December of 2021, literally just a year ago, I put book 2 out. And at first it didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden it was selling, and it was dragging book 1 along with it. And I'm going, well, maybe there's something to this author thing. And started writing book 3. And in May of this year, just, only 7 months ago, I pushed book 3 out. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, I had no clue how successful I was. None. I mean, I didn't know, and I'm looking, I'm going, and at the time, 800, 900 reviews on book one. Book two had like 500 or 600. Book three had several hundred after the first month. And I'm going, okay, none of that meant anything to me.
They were units, but you didn't have a yardstick to measure them against.
Yeah, I didn't understand, and I can look at other people's books but when I look at other people's books, I look at Ringel, I look at Weber, and they've got several thousand, and I'm going, okay. And then finally I said, you know what? I had so many, and I don't think of them as bad reviews. I think of them as honest reviews, where I had people review the book that basically said story was great, characters are great, but man, you need someone to do serious editing on your books. And I'm going, okay, I need help. And I've looked, I can't find it. Somewhere someone sent me, and I don't know who it was, I didn't recognize the email address, saying that, hey, they love my books, and asked, have you ever thought about going with Chris Kennedy Publishing? And I'd investigated going with publishers, and you go to the Bain or the Tor or any of the other websites, and getting them to look at your books is like, unless you're an insider, is next to impossible. You send the book, you have to send the book in, and it goes in the slush file, and maybe 6 months from now, somebody will get back to you.
And they've only got like 4 or 5 slots a year that aren't already taken.
Yeah. And I've learned a whole bunch about that side of the house too, so anyway, I and I was friends with Chris on Facebook. So I sent him a Facebook message saying, hey, Fred Hughes, I've followed you on Facebook, been friends on Facebook for several years. I've written a couple of books, and I'd be interested in sort of rolling those books and my story into Chris Kennedy Publishing. And before the sun went down that day, Chris was back with me, got back to me. Yeah, when we need to get together and talk. So the next day we had a Zoom call, and the next day I was signing a contract with Chris Kennedy Publishing. And at that point, a whole realm of resources were opened up to me. I was able to interact with other authers. Some like me. I had peers that I could actually talk to,
Mm-hmm.
and then actually, and I was interacting with them not as a fanboy, but as another author. And
isn't it amazing to have a group of people like the ones that Chris has brought together, who seem to be, one of their main things is to encourage you and make you better. And they're not just self-motivated and self-centered. They are just as excited about you being successful as they are about them being successful.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I'm writing in an entirely self-created universe, sort of like John in his Lunar Fruit State, sort of like Kevin in his Salvage Title universe, and it's all, so I didn't cut my teeth, co-writing with someone else or writing a book inside someone else's universe,
or writing 10 short stories for different anthologies and saying, well, I might make a novel out of that one.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I'm like, I don't want to say writing legitimate novels, but I mean, I'm writing my own stuff. And I take a great deal of pride in that I've created this universe. But anyway, it's funny because, so I started interacting with these authors, and, we talk, and every Saturday night there's a Zoom call. And so we're on there and we can see each other. And it's a great way to exchange information and ask questions about this or about that. And that's and that right there is the biggest benefit of being with Chris, is that I have access to those resources. And, Chris has people that understand advertising. People, ever since I joined Chris, and I talk to these other authors, and they asked me, well, how did you do this? How did you write, a first book indie, no help, and you have over 1,000 reviews? And I tell them, I don't know. I said, I mean, I'd like to think that I wrote a pretty good book, and yeah, I spent some money in advertising. I said, but I didn't have any clue what I was doing. I said, it was a lot of trial and error, and I wasted an awful lot of money, on, not knowing what I was doing. I said, I think it's more the story than my skill as an entrepreneur as far as hawking a book on the internet. The story sort of carried it, and I think the same goes for the second and third book. The story carried it. I said all I can attest to is that advertising makes a difference. The cover of a book makes a difference, and I realized that early on, because I'm old enough that hey, I remember the weekly trip to Barnes and Noble
to see the Del Rey covers.
Yeah, well, yeah, basically, you walk up and down the sci-fi aisle, and you stopped because a cover caught your eye.
Yep. Bain, Del Rey, and Tor were the best at doing covers for a long time.
And so I didn't spend a lot of money on my covers, but they came out pretty good. So, and even, Kevin Steverson, said, hey, you got great covers. He said, and between Kevin, Bill Webb, and Mark Stallings, they're sort of handling Chris Kennedy Publishing International. And he goes, those covers will sell books in Germany. He says, easy. He says, I can't wait till we get enough of your books out so that we can start rolling them into German language books.
I think they'll do really well overseas.
Yeah, and that came, Mark, I think, but when book 3 comes out, we'll start seeing those books come out overseas, and that's something that I would have never had access to outside of Chris Kennedy Publishing. So sort of let Chris take care of doing the carrying at least most of the water as far as advertising is concerned, and how to properly launch a book, which I never ranked, as well as the book sold, as many reviews as all 3 books have together. I never ranked that high in any of the categories. But the relaunch of book 2, I managed to get number 1 in new action adventure, which to me it was great to see that. But I couldn't have done that without Chris. And winning awards and getting the orange tags was never a priority for me. It was to get them out there and convince people to buy them.
But it sure feels good.
Oh yeah, sure feels good. And yeah, people, they're right. It does help, being able to, put that in an ad does help drive sales. So, but that's what Chris, and then, hey, and even afterwards, I remember after book 1, Chris sent me, after he got done editing book 1, his final publisher's edit, he sent me a very long email, and it was funny, basically telling me, this is all the things you did right in book 1, and these are all the things that you need to improve on. He said, if you want to write like Weber, you need to do the following things. And since he has written with David, I've taken all that to heart, and I'm hoping that book 4, and I know that book 5 will show improvement in that regard. But that's what having a good editor and a good publisher, and a publisher that is also a writer does for you. So I'm hoping that, the story remains the same and the quality of the writing is better.
Yeah. And when all else fails with Chris, he always returns to being an educator. He always returns to trying to offer opinions and criticisms that'll make you better.
Oh yeah, and he came back. It was funny because he sent me back after he sent the email. He's like sent me a text message basically saying, "Don't get upset about." And I said, "Oh no," I said, "You're right. I mean, those are all things I need to get better at." I said, "So don't worry about that."
Yeah, because there's no ill will intended. He's just trying to make you better. So, well, we know we've got 3 books for all intents and purposes out. 4th on the way. 5th one almost done.
5th is almost done. I'm like at 80,000 words in that. There's a tentative, Chris, quote unquote, says, I don't do this, but I've got you written and in pencil. That book 5 will come out the first week in April. And the name of that book 4's name is Prince Peacemaker. Book 5's name is Prince Renegade. So I'm just going to leave that out there. I'm not going to give you I'm not going to extrapolate at all about what that name may mean. And there will be a book 6 and a book 7 in this series.
Are you going to just continue to exclusively write in this universe, or do you have some ideas for some other books?
I have a book that I've gotten, maybe a book that I've been toying around with. It's only like 5 or 10,000 words in it. That's a more new, basically, it's sort of more of a starfighter, newer era, call it late 20th, early 21st century. And it's going to be about what I'm going to call the first solar war. So it's about a fighter squadron fighting, space fighters. So I'm toying with that sort of. I haven't put a lot of effort into it because I sort of come back and forth. I'm toying with the idea, and we'll see what Chris says about this. So I've been writing a lit RPG book, which is something totally different, and it's going to be a space lit RPG, which is a little different. Most lit RPGs are more fantasies or Dungeons or Dragons, and so this is a little different for me. So I've got those three. I'm actually doing research, but I haven't put any word to paper on an alt history. And to me, it's a true alt history as opposed to it's an alt history more in the S.M. Stirling form of alt history, as opposed to some others. As opposed to what if James, John Wilkes Booth had missed, and Lincoln lived. So I've got those, and then obviously I've already got plot lines for a prequel to the Britannia series about the original colonies that there's always there's always stories floating around in there. I just have to figure out how to get them out.
So if our listeners want to know more about Fred and wants to know more about what Fred is writing, are you on any social media? Is there any way for them to follow or get information from you?
Well, you can always go to Fred Hughes Publishing on Facebook. I do have a fredhughespublishing.com, and that has a blog, which I'm way behind on. And as soon as book 3 comes out, I'm going to have the links up there for being able to go to Amazon to order all the books, or also the ability to read the blog, which will keep you up to date on what's going on, and also the ability to buy signed authors' copies directly from me. So all that'll be at fredhughespublishing.com.
And has there been anything that I've missed or anything that you want to talk about that you'd like to say before we finish the podcast today?
No, I had a great time. And it seems like we talked forever, but
well, we talked
probably
for a
it'll end
little
up
bit.
being about.
Yeah, we talked for a little bit before we went on air, so that made it stretch a little bit.
And probably if you eliminate all the dead time and the nonsense, it's probably only 10 minutes, so I'm okay.
But, well, I can't tell you how happy I am that you brought your books to Chris Kennedy Publishing. I can't tell you how good they really are. They are great reads. And I hope every person that's listening to the podcast, if you haven't already bought at least the first book, please go buy it. I can tell you will not regret it. It's a wonderful read. And every book so far has been fantastic. And I cannot recommend Fred's work to you enough. Fred, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy writing schedule to talk to us.
Well, I appreciate it, and anytime, I'm always available. So, thanks so much for having me, Randy.
You've been listening to the CKP Future Books podcast with host Randy Willis. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider leaving it a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you subscribe. Show likes and channel subscriptions are also much appreciated on the CKP YouTube channel. Finally, if you'd like to know more about this author or others on the CKP roster, visit chriskennedypublishing.com. Thanks for listening to the CKP Future Books podcast. We'll see you next time.